Hello students, now we will discuss a very interesting topic. You may find this topic a little technical also, which is on FTP and Telnet. Let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Shantanu Gangri. I am the fellow of the Knowledge Management Division of TELI. Now, let us try to understand what is a Telnet. Telnet is a standard TCP/IP protocol for providing the virtual terminal services standardized by uh, ISO, and ISO stands for International Standard Organization. In this protocol, the client server first sets up a connection link with the remote server, and then keystrokes from the user's keyboard are transferred directly to the remote computer, which looks like the keystrokes were passed from the keyboard connected to a certain machine. The result is also carried back to the user from the remote machine. From the remote machine, it is a two-way process. The process is considered to be transparent to the users because it seems like the user is directly attached to the remote machine. The remote machine is identified by Telnet client service software through defining either of its IP address or domain name. The process for accessing a remote machine can be complicated because the different operating system could be running on the different machine, and also every machine and its operating system accept a combination of unique characters as tokens. So here we are handling heterogeneous systems. So it's not homogeneous. We need to understand there's a different systems. It's called as heterogeneous systems, where we need a mechanisms to find the computer type and its specific terminal emulator, which we want to access remotely. Now, this is a typical example. What we have just now we have gone into is a typical example, a pictorial view of the Telnet. So you can see here that one of the Telnet is a client in the Telnet platform. One is a client and another is a server. Now, so when you are working as a client, so you have to get connected to the server. So there is an input is coming from the client using their keyboard, getting the information, sending it to the server, and the server is replying back. So the server is replying back as the output what he has keyed in, and it is getting displayed on the client's system itself. So this is a completely a two-way communication processes which are involved in it. Another important component is called FTP, or in short form, what we call it as file transfer protocol. It is primarily used, the file transfer protocol is primarily used for transferring the files from local machine to remote machine. Means machine which is there in your system, in your desktop, to a machine somewhere else. FTP client establishes the connections with the help of the TCP. The FTP server allows multiple clients to access the server concurrently. The transfer of a file to the remote machine may encounter some issues such as file name conventions, directory structure, representation of text and data in two different systems can be distinct, which would make transferring of the difficult. So we are talking about a heterogeneous system here. FTP sets up two connections between the host, which makes it more efficient. The first connection is used for transferring the data and other for controlling the information like commands and responses. In the control connection, only one line of command or response is transferred at a time. FTP uses port 21 for control connection and port 20 for data connection. In the entire FTP session, the control connection remains activated while data connection opens for transferring the files, and then closed when the file is completely transferred. So So that is what is basically called as FTP. What is Telnet and FTP? If we try to look at both together, because this particular topic is interconnected with each other. Telnet stands for telecommunication network. So from telecommunication, the tel word was taken, and from network, the network was taken. So it is called as Telnet. And file transfer protocol is FTP. Both are the application layer protocol. They are connection oriented protocols as they create a connection between the remote host and the server. Okay, so as name file transfer protocol, FTP is used for transferring the file from one system to another system. In context of networking, both Telnet and FTP are the application layer protocols and are used to establish a connection between remote user and the host at the remote location. Like I'm giving you an example. I'm talking about a remote user and host continuously. Let me give you an example. Nowadays, I'm working from home. Now, when I'm working from home, this system, this laptop, is a what we basically called as it's a client. Now, what I generally do, I have to get connected to the server which is installed in Terry. So I am working remotely. So for that, there is a network protocol is there. So through that, I enter the server system of the server system through internet. Thus, I enter the server of the which is placed in my office. Now, for that, there are certain things are required. Like for example, you need a user ID and a password. And what is additional thing for security reasons, some of the organization, like in our organization, we use what is called as Google Authenticator. Because in Google Authenticator, there is a particular number comes to in your mobile. So once I connect to my server, it asks for a Google Authenticator. It's kind of an OTP, one-time password number. It comes to my system. I type that system, and then I can access all the resources remotely which are placed. I am sitting here and my server is in my office. So I can easily get connected. In the same way, it gives me all facilities, like for example, Microsoft Outlook is there, or different other applications are there, so which I can easily access through it. Also, it is possible that both these protocols can be used in a collaborated way to transparently log in to the host server. Telnet enables a client user access the resources of a server remotely, whereas FTP is used for copying a file from one to another machine. Okay, like for example, sometimes we developed a very large, working files, and I have to transfer it from one machine to the another machine. So for that, this FTP or a file transfer protocol is required very much. Otherwise, your entire bandwidth can get choked. So file transfer protocols helps me to transfer a a good number of, good amount memory amount of files transfer from one system to the other. The Telnet protocol uses port number 23 for the connection. On the contrary, FTP uses port 21 and 20 for control and data connections respectively. Telnet does not employ any security measures. Hence, it is an insecure platform. As against FTP uses encryption methods which implement security system. In Telnet, the user needs to log in first in the remote machine, and then operations can be performed. Conversely, in FTP, the user needs not log into the remote machine, need not log into the remote machine. So if I look at the two definitions between Telnet and FTP, I have divided into a table which will help you to understand both the concepts of Telnet and FTP. So once you have understood this, it would be easy for you to implement one of these in your systems as per the requirement is. Like when I'm suppose the definition itself makes them a very great difference. Telnet is an abbreviation for telecommunication network and is simply a connection protocol that allows a user to connect to a remote server that is listening for commands. Once the connection is established, the user can then issue commands to the server computer and examine the responses that are back. On the other hand, FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol, and its primarily concern is to facilitate the transfer of files from one point to another, along with a few management capabilities like making and deleting the directories also. Port numbers use, in general, Telnet uses 23 port of its command operations. While in case of FTP, port numbers 20 and 21 can be used to establish connection and perform the file transfer operations. Number of connections, due to single operated port, Telnet can establish only one connection. On the other hand, as FTP has two ports available, so FTP establishes two connections. One is for control command and another is for data transfer. There is a other differences are there, like for example, remote login. And in case of Telnet, remote login is mandatory. As an issue, commands could be run only after the login is given. On the other hand, remote login is not mandatory in case of FTP. Test cases in system testing, since it is performed by a group of testers, it would contain more negative test cases as far as the Telnet is concerned. On the other hand, acceptance testing contains more of positive test cases in case of file transfer protocol, FTP. Inputs, all the possible dummy inputs are used in the system testing. And in case of FTP, on the other hand, in acceptance testing, all the possible random inputs are used in it. So these are some of the 6 major differences between a Telnet as well as a FTP system. Another important component when we are talking about Telnet and FTP and all, we need to also understand what is called as Network Virtual Terminal or NVT. NVT stands for Network Virtual Terminal, a universal interface defined by Telnet. With the help of the NVT, the client Telnet software transform characters, data or commands coming from the local terminal into the NVT form and transmit them to the network. Then the server Telnet translates NVT form of data and commands into the form that can be accepted by the remote computer. There are 3 standard services provided by Telnet. Firstly, it provides an interface to the remote system defined by Network Virtual Terminal, that is NVT, as mentioned above. The client program is devised to use the standard interface, and it need not to be understand the internal details of all possible remote systems. Secondly, Telnet provides a mechanisms which enables the client and the server to settle options and a set of standard options. Lastly, both ends of the connections are equally treated by Telnet. Now, here I have used a picture which shows the typical example of a Telnet connectivity, what is basically called as a eavesdropping attack on a Telnet connectivity. And this is very, very popular as far as the Telnet connectivity is concerned. This figure presents a sample mock attack on an unprotected network protocol such as Telnet. So you can imagine what is the problem with the Telnet. Without encryption, the data communications can be read by anyone that has access to the network packet stream. So anybody can get into it and they can access all those responses. The figure also shows the black terminal window is used to run a common network traffic analysis tool that is called TCP dump. while the maroon window is used to run a Telnet session to a weather information service. A closer look at the TCP dump window reveals that the contents of the Telnet sessions are easily readable from the traffic dump. Even, in fact, you can see both the context are different. One is the traffic details and another is the weather details. But since both of them are open, so from the maroon one, Telnet, which is on weather, I can read even the traffic details also from the traffic dump, as would be usernames, passwords, and either other details if such had been transmitted. So this is what is basically called as a eavesdropping attack on a Telnet connectivity. Now, replacing the insecure Telnet with secure shell. Now, we have already seen an example of eavesdropping in Telnet connectivity. So, how we can, replace the insecure Telnet with a secure shell that is called SSH. It is called secure shell, provides a secure alternative to Telnet. SSH protects user identities, passwords, and data from network snooping attacks and allows secure logins and file transfers. SSH has practically replaced Telnet, and the older protocol is used these days only in the rare cases to access the decades-old legacy equipment and does not support more modern protocols. And there are still organizations that simply do not care about security. For Unix and Linux operating system, the open SSH implementation comes free with the operating system and can be used to replace the Telnet. So SSH came as a savior for Telnet. Now, Telnet security problems. You can see that this is a typical example where you have a client and you have a server. We have seen the previous example also, and both the client and the server both are connected to each other through a Telnet protocol. So the Telnet association between the client and the server is not encrypted. Anyone with access to the TCP/IP packet flow between the communicating hosts can reconstruct the data that flows between the endpoints and read the messaging, including the usernames and the passwords that are used to log in into the remote machines. This network attack requires very little expertise and can be performed with network debugging tools that are readily available. There is something very important thing which is there, which is called as packet sniffing. Packet sniffing attacks like the above were the underlying reason for developing SSH, and they were the most common security problem on the internet and ready in the mid-1990s. Today, mass monitoring and mass collection of credentials from the internet by intelligence agencies, criminals, and hackers is a routine process. Use of Telnet. Telnet is one of the protocols that is used extensively on the internet and LAN. In other words, LAN stands for local area network. Telnet is a protocol that is used in order to get access to the remote computer or the terminals. It makes connections over the internet using the TCP/IP protocol. Telnet is often referred to as TN. It was conceived back in 1969 by the IETF, that is Internet Engineering Task Force. Telnet stands for the Teletype Network. Telnet is especially designed for remote server access, where we can manage all the client server architectures. There are also other commands that we need to insert in order to successfully complete the Telnet connection operation. Device must be supported for the commands in order to use the Telnet. There might be some devices that are not supported, hence we cannot execute the command in those devices. Working of the Telnet. Telnet basically sends all the messages in plain and clear text. It means there is no specific mechanisms for security. Therefore, it is not considered that secure, and people don't prefer sending their personal data over Telnet. This is one of the biggest disadvantage we see in the Telnet platforms. Moreover, there is no proper authentication required. In other words, we can't ensure that data is just transferred from two of the hosts and there is no interception in the middle. Therefore, it is another problem that is happening when it comes to the security of the Telnet. However, now in many services and applications, there are improved measures taken in order to make it more secure. Therefore, there are many applications where the secure shell or SSH is replacing the Telnet. This is another example by for Telnet. Say, for example, a secure network, we have got an IP number here. We have a Telnet server. From that Telnet server, two of the IPs are connected. So client 1 and client 2 are the recognized IP number. One, you can say that initial numbers are all correct. Last numbers is 104 and another is 105. But there is another client 3 which is from a different IP. It is not getting connected because it has been blocked by the firewall. Firewall is kind of a gateway which allows or disallows any client to enter the server. So that is how it takes place in a Telnet server. Telnet clients. There are many clients available for Telnet utility. Some of them are as follows, like Putty and Plink. These both are the free and open source SSH clients that can be used. They both are compatible with raw TCP clients for Windows, Unix, as well as for the Linux environment also. There is another client called Absolute Telnet available for the Windows. Here we will also find the SSH and SFTP support. Roomba is the terminal emulator for the Telnet. Roomba. There are some of the exact clients we may like to use. However, we will also need the support of the libraries in order to transmit the data, which brings us to some other topics. Telnet libraries. There are many Telnet libraries where the client and the servers are supported. In some of the libraries, the security is not maintained. Here are some of the famous libraries used and related informations. Like for example, Go Telnet. In this library, the client and the server support is available. Along with this, the security is also taken care of and we can use the Telnet for data transmission purpose. So it gives a authentication for that. libtelnet, here we can use it for client and server. However, security is not maintained here. The license of this library is in the public domain. Telnet lib, here the only client is supported and we won't get the support for the security or the server. All the libraries are available on all the platforms. Hence, we can use this library on BSD, GNU Linux, Windows, and also on Mac operating system. Therefore, we can use the libraries according to the requirements. Programming language is different here. However, most of the people are using the Go Telnet as most of the things are supported and people who want security over their data. So here in this example, you will look at a client-server relationship using a Telnet client and a Telnet server. So this clearly shows you have a user's IO device, that is input-output device. Then you have an operating system where client reads from the terminal, client sends it to the server, so it's a two-way communication, and then the Telnet server receives from the client and server sends it to the pseudo terminal also. So between the two systems, what is connectivity is the common connectivity is the TCP IP protocol or internet. This is another example of Telnet user terminal versus remote access. So where basically you have the user input in client representations, host output in client representations. In between, there is the internet, which is the host output and server commands in that network virtual terminal representation. And then you have a Telnet server and the host operating system. So it shows the connectivity that how a Telnet client and a terminal operating system through the internet phase, internet platform or internet gateway. It is getting connected to the Telnet server and its representative operating system. So that is what it is there. This is another example of FTP client where the file transfer between the file transfer and the client which is takes place. And these are some of the live examples of the file transfer protocols where you can see the how the files gets, transmitted from one to another. And this is how a parallel window can show you which file is getting transferred from one place to another. This is a passive mode of FTP where basically client starts this is basically a single system where the client starts command on the connection, then the client starts connection to a random server data port, and server sends responses and data to the client and data port. So it is a one-to-one connectivity between a client and the server basically. This is a client server protocol where you have the user interface, you have the control access and the data transfer protocol. And on the other hand, you have the control access and data transfer process, but both of them have got a data connectivity using the TCP IP or the internet. Computer network FTP, where the control connections uses very simple rules for communication. Through control connections, we can transfer a line of command or a line of response at a time. The control connection is made between the control processes. The control connection remains connected during the entire interactive FTP process. So one is a control connection, another is a data connection. The data connection uses very complex rules as data types may vary. The data connection is made between the data transfer processes. The data connection opens when a command comes for transferring the files and closes when the file is transferred. FTP clients is a program that implements a file transfer protocol which allows you to transfer files between two hosts on the internet. It allows a user to connect to a remote host and upload or download the files. It has a set of commands that we can use to connect to a host, transfer the files between you and your host, and close the connection. The FTP program is also available as a built-in component in a web browser. This GUI or the user interface based FTP client makes the file transfer protocol very easy and also does not require to remember the FTP commands. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of FTP. The advantages are speed, efficiency, security, back and forth movement. Speed, one of the biggest advantages of FTP is speed. The FTP is one of the fastest way to transfer the files from one computer to another. It is more efficient as we do not need to complete all the operations to get the entire file. To access the FTP server, we need to log in with the username and the password. Therefore, we can say that FTP is more secure. Back and forth movement, FTP allows us to transfer the files back and forth. Suppose you are a manager of the company, you send some information to all the employees and they all send information back on the same server. So that's basically the advantages of an FTP. There are certain disadvantages also. The standard requirement of the industry is that all FTP transmission should be encrypted. However, not all the FTP providers are equal and not all the providers offer encryption. So we will have to look out for the FTP providers that provides encryption. FTP serves two operations: to send and receive large files on a network. However, the size limit of the file is 2 GB and can be sent. It also does not allow you to run simultaneous transfers to multiple receivers. Passwords and file contents are sent in a clear text that allows unwanted eavesdropping. So it is quite possible that attackers can carry out the brute force attack by trying to guess the FTP password. It is not compatible with every system also. Telnet login. So when I'm talking about Telnet login, it has a local login. Like computer networks logging, when a user logs into a computer, then it is called a local logging. When the workstation is running terminal emulator, the keystrokes entered by the users are accepted by the terminal driver. The terminal driver then passes these characters to the operating system, which in turn invokes the desired application program. However, the operating system has special meaning to a special characters. For example, Unix. Some combination of characters have special meaning, such as control character with Z means suspend. Such situations do not create any problem as the terminal driver knows the meaning of such characters, but it can cause the problems in remote login also. So this is a typical example of a local login. You can see the application program layer, the operating system or the terminal driver, and then the terminal, a client terminal is shown here. Remote login, which is we have seen local login, now the remote login, when the user wants to access an application program on a remote computer, then the user must perform remote login. How a remote login occurs? At the local side, the user sends the keystrokes to the terminal driver. The characters are then sent to the Telnet client. The Telnet client, which in turn transforms the characters to a universal character set known as network virtual terminal characters and delivers them to the local TCP/IP for stack. At the remote side, the commands in NVT forms are transmitted to the TCP/IP at the remote machine. Here, the characters are delivered to the operating system and then pass on to the Telnet server. The Telnet server transforms the characters, which can be understandable by a remote computer. However, the characters cannot be directly passed on to the operating system, such as remote operating system does not allow the characters from the Telnet server. Therefore, it requires some piece of software that can accept the characters from the Telnet server. The operating system then passes these characters to the appropriate application program. So this is a typical example of a Telnet client and a Telnet server and how a remote login takes place. How network virtual terminal works? The network virtual terminal is an interface that defines how data and commands are sent across the network. In today's world, systems are heterogeneous. For example, the operating system accepts a special combination of characters such as end of file token running on a DOS operating system or control Z, while the token running on a Unix operating system is control plus D. Telnet solves this issue by defining a universal interface known as network virtual interface. The Telnet client translates the characters that come from a local terminal into NVT form and then delivers them to the network. The Telnet server then translates the data from NVT form into a form which can be understandable by a remote computer. So this is a typical example of an NVT system, which you can look at it. So with that, we come to an end of a very, very interesting topic of file transfer protocols and Telnet. I'm sure students, you have understood the entire concept in a simplified format, but there is a lot of technicalities involved. But as a professional, you need to understand that, because tomorrow when you are working in a library, you should be knowing, because you would be implementing some of the, if you are in the process of working with a computer, or if you are implementing some software or something like that, at that time these concepts would be of great use to you. So thank you all. Thank you very much for patience learning.